Okay, so welcome to this week's episode of The Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing you the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name is Sol.
I'm Jamie.
And today's guest is Fatima. And Fatima is part of our Jumpstart special series where we're highlighting some of the amazing things that Jumpstart do for grads. Fatima, I'm sure, will shed more light on her story, but currently she is working as an SDR in sales, which she got through the Jumpstart program. But Jamie, tell us more about what we can expect from this week's episode.
Yeah, plenty to expect from Fatima. The first one is her incredible story as a refugee herself and that began working in non-profit at university and how she now ended up in sales and motivated by money. The second one is what it's like working in a Wolf of Wall Street environment. And the third one is the support and aftercare of the Jumpstart process.
Amazing stuff. Let's get into the episode. Okay, so just before we get into the episode, can we just ask anyone who is listening on either Spotify or watching on YouTube just to give us a rating or a like? It is massively helpful to getting us up the algorithm and helping people find the podcast. So all we ask is a rating, hopefully 5 stars, but if you want to give less, then feel free, or a like on YouTube. It does loads for getting our podcast to the people who need it most and showing them the careers that they don't teach you about in school. So thanks very much for your time doing that. And without further ado, let's get back into the episode.
Okay, Fatima, thank you so much for coming on. Really looking forward to this conversation, and thank you to Jumpstart for obviously facilitating it. I think one thing that we picked up on with the briefing that you gave us, and we always like honesty in terms of looking at careers on this podcast, is that you admitted that you were money motivated, and we have our own opinions on that. But to throw you in a bit of the deep end to start with, what exactly is it about the money side that motivates you?
That is a great question. Yeah, I am money motivated for sure. And as one of my managers said to me the other day, the way he puts it is coin operated, which I really like. So I'm definitely coin operated, and that's really why I'm in the line of work I am in. But I think for me, money has always been a hugely important aspect. For context that we haven't actually spoken about, I came to the UK when I was a kid as a refugee, and so my family comes from a refugee background. And so growing up, I think I had kind of first-hand experience of what it's like to struggle with money and what financial security could mean and does mean. And so, you know, I watched my parents work really, really hard. My dad has always been self-employed, has always been an entrepreneur. And, you know, that money comes and goes with entrepreneurship, but he's a really hard worker. And I think I always took that kind of inspiration from him. So for me, growing up, it wasn't really a choice. Like I never thought about money as, you know, in my list of things I wanted in a career, it was always the top. And I never really thought of that it wouldn't be at the top, essentially. Like there was no kind of world in my mind where I wouldn't be pursuing kind of earning potential in a career. So I guess that's really the be-all, end-all, is that I think when you experience what it's like to not have money easily accessible, it makes you want to work really hard and makes you want to be in the opposite position for yourself as an adult. So I think that for me is the main reason. I want to be financially secure. I want to have opportunities, you know, in adulthood that my parents didn't have, and I want them to be comfortable as well.
I think that's so interesting because I completely agree with everything you said, and also contextually makes so much sense with your background as well. And there's actually a bit of a negative mindset around people saying, you know, you've got to love everything that you do and you've not got to care about money. But, you know, you ask the same person, like, why don't you become a monk in the Himalayas? And they're like, oh, well, I want to earn a bit of money. And, you know, that argument falls down pretty quickly. Yeah. Have you found admitting that or kind of talking to your friends about that sort of thing difficult, or are you quite open and honest in how that motivates you?
No, I think a lot of my friends are very similar to me in the sense that, you know, they're also very money motivated, and that shows. I mean, to be fair, when I look around at a lot of my friendship group, they're all either consultants or in finance or, you know, in commercial law. So I think that talking about money has always been pretty easy. And for me, I think in the career I'm in, I know some salespeople don't like to admit this, but I think we all know that if you're in sales, regardless of what type of sales you're in, but especially in my line of work in tech sales, you are money motivated. There is no kind of being around the bush. I think that's not the only thing we care about, of course. You know, there's so many other things to care about. And to be clear, you know, I'm really lucky in the sense that I love my line of work and I love what I do. And as a bonus, you know, it has great earning potential. But, you know, to be clear, I wouldn't want to be in a job where I'm 100% miserable all the time, but making loads of money. I think there's a balance. But yeah, no, I think I'm really lucky in the sense that I'm surrounded by people that have a similar mindset. And also in my line of work, my colleagues and I, it's just money is it's quite interesting to people who don't maybe come from a sales background, but we talk about commission and compensation and bonus and base salaries quite openly because it's something that we're all pursuing, and it's something that is important to all of us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that's spot on. And also, like Jamie and I have always said in our friendship group or in our kind of wider people we know, that actually we'd love to speak about money a bit more because it is a good motivator, and I think it is great to be honest with people. Yeah. The only thing that I'm really interested in the kind of sales aspect of it, and I guess in your background in recruiting as well, is do you think there might be a slight negative, and I definitely suffer from this as well, the slight negative of chasing the grad job money versus the money when you're 30, 40, 50, because I know, for example, some of our friends have got into accounting and that's probably not the best paid job leaving university, but at the same time, your earning potential over 30 years is massive.
Yeah.
Have you struggled with that trade-off potentially, or do you think that's something that sales still protects you from?
I think sales is it's very difficult to speak about earning actual earnings in sales because there's so much that makes up your paycheck in sales, and also each type of sales in terms of industry has different earning potential. I think one thing that is pretty common knowledge is that base salaries in sales are typically lower. And so if you're leaving university and you're going into a sales role, typically they are going to be low, like average. But then it depends on how much commission you can make. Is your commission uncapped? Is it capped? Again, percentages. Do you have accelerators and kickers and bonus plans and all that sort of stuff? So it's always so difficult to talk about earning in sales because everyone from salesperson to salesperson and industry to industry varies so much what people earn. But I think that's an interesting question. I think sometimes some people say that in sales, you either make no money or you make a lot of money. And there's the middle ground is that you make good pay. So it is very difficult. But I would say that with sales, there's definitely a huge earning potential as a grad. So I think we talked about this. When I was in university, there were different interests and I wasn't 100% sure and I was exploring different things. But for me, I think I had a place in law school when I first got into sales, and it was realizing that I could earn as much as I would as a first year trainee lawyer in my current job 3 years early at 22, as opposed to 25 when I graduate from law school. That made me stay, because if money was my number one motivator, then why wouldn't I stay in an industry that allows me to do that? And I think that for me was the switching point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to pursue that. And also it didn't tie into my future plans anyway. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it depends. But I do think that there's a huge earning potential in sales right after university, depending on how good you are, how hard you work, and the type of industry that you're in as well. Because I think industry and the type of product and the demand for it has a huge impact on how successful you can be in your career as well.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting answer. And I think for anyone listening to that, it's definitely going to be useful for us to go more into detail on the whole sales side of things and understand a little bit what you're doing now and exactly how that came about. Yeah. But just to jump back, I think it might surprise some people to now hear that when you're at university, you were actually in the non-profit sector, right? Yeah. And then you've also just mentioned there that you looked at maybe going to law school. So just fill in a few gaps there and talk us through a little bit about the journey, what happened at university and what was the non-profit you were doing and how has that led to where you are now?
Yeah, so it's so interesting that you say that, because my first sales job in my interview, when I get to each job interview, I always ask, do you have any concerns? Do you have any questions? Anything I haven't addressed? And my first VP of sales at the end of the interview said to me, it's quite interesting because you've done a lot of non-profit work, but you want to be in a sales role and you're saying you're money motivated. And I don't see how that kind of gels together. And I think I calmed her concern about that, because for me, so just to rewind a little bit, when I was in university, had many different interests. They were all linked really. So I studied a degree in politics and international relations at UCL. And so part of what I wanted to do was naturally go into party politics. I was never really interested in the civil service because I'm very opinionated and I can't be neutral, but I wanted to do party politics, or as a kind of an alternative, it was law. And law really was interested in law mainly because everyone would always tell me in school that I'd be a great lawyer, and that was kind of something that stuck, but I didn't really know much about the career, and I didn't really know much about getting into law, but it was an option. And so law and politics were kind of the main things that I was looking at. The non-profit element of it was more a passion project of mine. So I'm originally from Afghanistan, and I set up the Afghan Society. It was a cultural society at UCL. And through that, by chance, I ended up going to events at Queen Mary and King's and Imperial, where they also had Afghan societies, and meeting other Afghan students around London. And as a lot of societies do in university, you raise money, right? You can have charity weeks, and loads of different societies do it. But I think the logic was, why are we doing it individually when we could just get together and do it as one big kind of push, and we raise a load of money for a charity each year? And so that's what happened. We got together. I think it was about 15 universities in the first year, and it wasn't meant to be an organisation. It was just meant to be a one-off kind of, we'll do it this year and see how it goes. And we smashed it. I think in our first year, we raised close to £50,000 in 2 weeks for Noble Connection, which was a charity essentially funding the education of orphan children in Afghanistan. And once we saw that we can raise 50k in 2 weeks, we were like, why don't we continue doing this? And so it became an organisation called Afghan Charity Week, or ACW, and it was a 2-week fundraising period each year. And the next year, we kind of set up as a formal organisation, and I became chair of the organisation. And we expanded to, I think, 20 plus universities, including Scottish universities that year. And I think we were close to about 100 volunteers, if not more. And we hosted an annual kind of charity gala, and the second year was the biggest. We had like 400 attendees. This was right after the COVID restrictions were lifted, and we raised close to £65,000 that year, all virtually in 2 weeks. So we had no in-person events. And so it became this whole thing. And for me, it was very much passion project. Did I think about, leaving university and doing this full time? Yeah, I did. But I think for me, it sounds awful, but the money aspect was the pull towards an actual grad job. And I continued doing that on the side. And because it was a student-led initiative, it really was the students powering it. And I obviously graduated, so I wasn't a student anymore. So I'm still very much deeply connected to ACW. I stepped down as chair last year, but they're doing great work, and to date, we've raised almost £200,000. And I say that over 4 or 5 years, but actually it's in a matter of weeks, because we only fundraise 2 weeks out of the year. So, we've funded amazing projects and we've done great work. But for me, I think career-wise, that was always something that I will be passionate about. And volunteer and non-profit work is still something that takes up a lot of my free time. It's just that I give my free time to it, and I didn't see it as a career. So that's really how we got to be here now, where I'm not working in the non-profit sector anymore.
I love that though, because I think, again, it's another thing that is seen by people is like, if you love and obsess by something, you have to make it your career. Whereas some could argue that if you go and make a load of money doing sales, even doing law, but like for you doing sales, then actually you can have a lot greater of an impact on that project and passion that you care about. Not only because you can put the money into it, but also you gain so many commercial skills, which, having like met a lot of people and know a lot of people who work in the charity sector, like you just don't develop them at the same rate. So I guess in some ways using it on the side is equally as, or maybe more beneficial to the charity work than actually going full time on it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, for me, the big realization for me is when my first job when I worked in recruitment, I worked in education technology recruitment. And that kind of like blew my mind, because when I didn't know much about the tech industry, and I certainly didn't know that there are mission-driven segments of the tech industry, that you can work in ed tech or health tech or climate tech. And that was kind of a massive awakening for me, that actually a lot of the companies that I was bringing on as clients and partnering with, they were doing very similar to work to what we were doing at ACW, where we were pushing for access to education, but they were essentially using tech to make that more widely accessible. And for me, I think I've always, even when I was confused between politics and law and non-profit and whatever else, for me, the one kind of constant for me was that I've always wanted to be a founder, and I've always wanted to start my own business. I come from an entrepreneurial family. My brother's an entrepreneur. My dad's an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. Like, everybody's in business. And so that was, for me, the end goal. And when I pieced everything together and I was like, hold on a second, I have this passion. I want to help people. I want to be a founder one day. And actually there are industries that I can do that in. I could start an ed tech project or a health tech project, because we also ran healthcare projects that I'm, also really passionate about. And then sales for me is kind of the number one skill in business. So, this for me is kind of an opportunity to learn a really high value skill that will help me in that kind of journey. I kind of pieced all these things together and I was like, oh my God, I don't have to run a non-profit. I was gain the skills and the insight and the experience to do this as a business, but have a mission and be impact driven, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. In the briefing that we spoke about beforehand, you said that actually one of the most important things for you is having that end goal in mind. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about it there, that I guess a lot of what is driving you towards your end goal is family driven, right? And what your family have done in the past. But as a bit of general advice for people listening that are thinking along the same lines, they want to have an end goal in mind. How would you advise that they go about figuring out their end goal, and then how do they work back from there?
It's a big question. That's an interesting one. I think that's difficult because I feel like sometimes and sometimes you don't. Have you read The Alchemist?
No, but I heard you mention it in the voice note, so I'm interested to hear.
I did. I keep thinking about it because I read it at the start of the year and I revisited it recently. And The Alchemist is obviously a fable about a young boy who's on this journey to fulfill his purpose, and he has this dream that he finds this treasure thousands of miles away in Egypt, and he sets off on this journey. And throughout the journey, he meets different people. And the biggest learning from reading The Alchemist to me was that, and again, it sounds really washy, but it really spoke to me. And that was that a lot of people, through listening to their heart or their mind, whatever it is, they know what it is that makes them tick when they're really young. And it's that thing that you're really interested in, or that thing that you think about and ask loads of questions about and are really curious about. But as you grow older and as life just becomes more mundane and exams and grades and money and jobs, you start to forget that, and you start to stop listening to what it is, to that voice inside of you that tells you that, you've got potential, that this is the thing that you want to achieve. And it's about kind of uncovering that. The book is this journey about, uncovering that and listening to your heart and listening to what it is that it's pushing you towards. And that really spoke to me, because I think, I'm not obviously saying I was 4 years old and I wanted to start my own business, but when I was a kid, what I really loved doing was organizing things, clubs, or, going into my driveway and selling my old toys like on the street or giving them away or whatever it was. And I was a massive organizer, and I loved like taking ownership of a project or something like that. It's funny because I think I lost sight of that for a bit. I lost sight of that massively, especially when I went to UCL, because UCL is the type of environment where everybody wants a corporate job. And it's almost like if you don't want a corporate job, you're a bit weird, because like, what else do you want to be doing with your life? And so I felt this pressure. It's so funny because even with law, right, I always wanted to be a barrister growing up when I did want to do law. But when I went to UCL, that changed to becoming a solicitor, and that changed from doing criminal law or family law or whatever else it was. And I wanted to do corporate law all of a sudden, because that's what everybody was doing. And so I can't answer the question because I don't know, but I think what I would say is that if you have something that it could be anything in the world, but if you have something that is niggling at you somewhere inside, and you know that that's the thing that makes you happy, that's the thing that you've thought about a million times, and if you've thought about something multiple times, chances are that's the thing that you really want to be doing, is uncovering ways that you can get there. And I think the biggest thing for me is that sometimes I feel like people think, like for me, I'll use myself as an example, like I want to be a founder and start my own business, but that doesn't mean I have to quit everything right now, right this second, and go and do something on my own. For me, it's about, what are the skills that I need to pick up, and what are the experiences that I need to pick up along the way, and doing that step by step, instead of thinking of it as this massive mountain and I need to drop everything right now and I need to go be an entrepreneur, because that doesn't work with everyone. So yeah, I don't think I answered that question, but there's something about, if you've got something niggling away at you and something that you think about often, figuring out what are the baby steps that you can do to prepare you to essentially get closer to that goal ultimately.
Yeah, no, I think I know you feel like you've not answered that question specifically, but actually I think it's a really good way of answering it, because a lot of people listening probably will be reassured by the fact that you still don't really know like how you ever get to that point, and you figured it out kind of along the way, and the way that you kind of jumped ship quite a few times, I think is actually quite good, because the majority of people are going to be like that, right? And you just got to figure it out in the end, and what comes to you at each time.
Yeah.
And especially on the speaking to your child and your inner what you did, I think that is one of the best ways to work out what makes you tick. That niggling feeling in your head, and also what you did when you had no pressure and you weren't thinking about paying rent and you weren't thinking about making bosses, parents, families happy. You just did what you wanted to do. And I think that's such a great message as to how to find where to go.
Yeah. And I think, this is going to sound batshit crazy to some people, but I've done a lot of therapy in my life, and I had a therapist who said to me one time, what were the things that you've really enjoyed doing as a kid? And I was like, I can't remember. And they were like, well, go away and think about it. And I started to realize I loved writing poetry as a kid. I loved reading. I was such a book nerd. I loved reading fiction, and all of a sudden I'm reading non-fiction all the time, self-help and sales books and how to be this and how to be that. And I loved painting, and I loved and I was like, why haven't I done these things in such a long time? And I went through this phase and I'm still such a massive reader now. I read almost a book a week, because that for me was the turning point. And I was like, I need to get back into doing the things that I really, really loved as a kid. And in a weird way, I know it sounds mental, but you almost feel more connected to the person that you were as a kid, and things start coming back to you, like interests and what made you happy, and just that inner feeling of happiness. And I think that all ties into being more curious. I think as children, we're so much more exploratory, and we're so much more curious as kids as we are adults. And I think that what Jamie, you said about moving around, that's the biggest thing for me, is to have the courage and the bravery to explore and to try things out, and not be afraid to move on if you know that something's not good for you, and take everything as a learning opportunity. Because the point is, we're all on this journey of figuring it out. Nobody knows how to get where they need to go, but it's about being brave enough to not be stagnant and not be sat in one position, and actually go out and do the thing that is really scary, quit the job and try another job, try a different industry, you know what I mean? And it's about connecting with that curiosity again.
I love that. And I think that really perfectly brings us back to your story, because I know you spent a bit of time in recruiting and it wasn't for you. So fill us in about how you got to that decision that recruiting wasn't for you, and then how you transitioned into the job you're in now.
Yeah. So recruitment, I fell into recruitment. I think everybody falls into recruitment. If you speak to a lot of recruiters and salespeople, really, it's always, I kind of found myself in this place. So when I graduated in June, I had a place in law school for January, but I had half the year where I didn't know what to do until then. And so I was like, well, I need a job, and I don't care what it is. It just needs to be a job, because I can't just sit around for 7 months. And so I knew a graduate recruiter, and he would send me loads of opportunities. And it is so funny looking back now, because he would send me a list of jobs that I didn't know what the hell they were about. I had no clue, like consultant roles that I now understand to be sales consultant roles, and recruitment roles and research roles. And looking back now, I realized that all of them were sales roles, so in one way or another. So regardless of which direction I went, I would have ended up in sales, which is funny to me, because it kind of hammers home that I am exactly where I need to be right now. But point is, I just accepted the first offer I got. And that was from a recruitment firm called Levin. And they appealed to me because they were really young and new and exciting. And, they were a graduate recruit. They're a recruitment firm that recruited graduates. And so everybody was really young, and, that kind of environment really appealed to me. And I was like, okay, well, I've got 6-7 months, I'll do this thing. And so I joined thinking that a recruiter is someone that just takes candidates through to interview and places them in jobs. But I didn't really think about how they get the vacancies to fill. And so that's when I realized, Rude Awakening, it's a sales role. And so half your time is spent doing cold outreach, cold calling companies who need to hire people, and essentially selling your services as a recruiter to them and getting them to sign a contract. And once they do, you then go out and obviously recruit the candidates to fill the role. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me, and I didn't realize that's what a recruiter is. So it's very hard. Recruitment is really, really, really hard, and have a lot of sympathy when I meet recruiters now, because I understand the pain. It's also it's got a huge turnover and churn rate. I was hired into a brand called Storm 6, and they were a complete startup brand within Levin. So £0 in revenue at the time, had just launched, and they hired a cohort of about 30 graduates, and we were less than half within 2 or 3 months in. Like, people dropped like flies because the pressure, it's very KPI driven. You have to hit your targets. You have daily targets, weekly targets, monthly targets, quarterly targets. And because it's a end-to-end sales role, you have revenue targets. You have to create revenue for the company. And you do that by placing people in these jobs and closing those deals out. And you obviously earn commission from that. So it's incredibly high pressured. And I think, the culture at Levin at the time, which in hindsight, at the time was really hard, but in hindsight, I'm actually quite grateful for. It was very much boiler room sales in the sense that the only way I can imagine it, which is going to make people laugh, but that scene from Wolf of Wall Street where like the sales floor is just loud and like people are on the phones and people are standing up, people flying everywhere. That's exactly what it was like. It was like power hour, everyone on the phone, everyone stands up, everybody's selling on the phone. You have to hit $100 in an hour. We had incentives running all the time. You were rewarded if you did well. You were not rewarded if you didn't do well. And it was quite cutthroat. Like, if you didn't hit your targets, then I'm sorry, you were out. Like, so when I joined, I was like, whoa, I did not think I'd be doing this. But I became like almost addicted to the buzz of it, the buzz of pushing something through, the buzz of something closing, knowing I'm going to get a paycheck and it's going to finance a holiday or something like that. And so I realized I'm actually really good at it. I closed our first deal and I brought in our first client. I closed our first partnership client. I realized, I'm actually really good at this and it pays really well. So come January, I rescinded my law school offer. And I was like, I'm just going to give this a go. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. I can always go back to law school. I can always apply to law school. And so I lasted in that company 18 months, which I'm really proud of because that was... Wow. Yeah, it was longer than a lot of people, and so I did a year and a half. But throughout it, the point is, like, it was a massive exposure experience for me because through that, I realized that I really find tech. I wasn't in tech; I was in tech recruitment, but it was adjacent to that industry. And so, by speaking to candidates, and I recruited software engineers, so I was speaking to them about the product side and just what it's like to work at a tech startup. And I was like, oh my God, this is really interesting. I kind of want to do this. The second thing I realized was that I really like sales for various reasons, but I was good at it and I wanted to do it. And the third thing I realized was that I love working in a startup. Some people might call me crazy, and rightly so, because working in a startup is really stressful, but I love the autonomy and the level of responsibility you get at a startup that you would never get at a corporate job. Startup, you're not doing small tasks. Like, you're genuinely responsible for a massive portion of the business, in my case generating revenue, which is what keeps the lights on, and you are treated as an adult and you're expected to just go and do it. Like, sometimes you have no direction, there is no process, there's no one to ask, and you just have to figure it out for yourself.
So to jump in then along that journey, at what point do our friends at Jumpstart come along?
They were lifesaver, let me tell you. And I love Jumpstart so much. And I actually, they run these referral competitions for like ex Jumpstart members where you refer people. And I won that. I probably won that months in a row because I refer so many people to Jumpstart. So when I was at Levin, still at the recruitment firm, I found out about Jumpstart online and there was a lot of buzz around it. I think a lot of young people and recent grads were talking about what Jumpstart is and what they do. And I think what jumped out to me was the fact that given that I was in recruitment at the time, it was such a spin on the recruitment process where it's like, actually, you're a candidate and the startups, the companies that want to hire you are going to pitch to you. They're going to pitch to you about why you should work for them. And that was like such spin on things that I really loved. But when I found out about Jumpstart, I wasn't ready to leave. Eventually, when I was, they'd reached out to me on LinkedIn and I'd put in an application. I think what I love about Jumpstart is that you get a real taste. For me, I was lucky because I was coming from a sales background, but even if you're a grad interested in sales, you get a taste of what sales is like before you're even on the program because they put you through really tough interviews. They put you through almost like a Dragon's Den style pitch. You know, it's very intense. And so it feels really good when you're finally on the program. And so that's what I did. So I was part of their February cohort and I didn't find something in February, so they re-enrolled me into the next cohort, and that's when I found my current company, Thrust Carbon. And so they hired me through Jumpstart, and I think going through the whole process is really valuable, but what's even more valuable with Jumpstart is the aftercare that you get afterwards. So at offer stage, they'll help you negotiate salaries, they'll do all of that kind of supportive admin stuff with you. But even since kind of leaving the cohort, I mean, they put on the best networking events. I've been to networking events with venture capital firms who are there to network with young professionals in startups. I've been to like a young founders event or future founders event where they put on kind of events where you can potentially find a co-founder. And so they put on amazing events. They put on a really great mentorship program. And actually today I have my first session with my sales mentor through Jumpstart. And I'm really great friends with the folks over there. And I think they're doing great work, really. So to answer your question, I wouldn't be in the role I am right now without Jumpstart.
I can see why you're good at sales. You've sold Jumpstart very well there. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. And it's obviously great to hear you talking about that so fondly, because I guess they've played a big part in where you are now. So just to share a little bit with us about what exactly it is you're doing now with Thrust Carbon, it'd be great to hear about what your role is exactly and what it entails day to day.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a sales development representative, or an SDR. Some companies call them BDRs, ADRs. We do the same thing. So SDRs are salespeople who are responsible for pipeline generation. So what that means is you have a pipeline of revenue that you really need to keep topped up so you have opportunities to make money. And so an SDR's job is to do a lot of cold outreach to companies that fit your ICP or your ideal customer profile. And we do a lot of email outreach, a lot of LinkedIn outreach, a lot of cold calling, with the ultimate aim of having these prospects at these target companies to book in a meeting with us. So typically that's a discovery call where they get on the call and we discuss their problems, challenges, and see whether we can support them essentially. And if we can, they move on to a second stage with an account executive. And an account executive's role is essentially what I was doing in recruitment, where it's kind of end to end. They're the ones that actually take it on from that second meeting stage all the way to closing the deal. And so the SDR's role essentially is to generate as many opportunities to close for their account executives. So it's this first kind of stepping stone into tech sales, that this is kind of an entry level role that you can do before you're then promoted either into an account executive or maybe into sales leadership or sales operations or sales engineering. There's so many different kind of routes that you can go through after being an SDR, but it is essentially the kind of entry point into tech sales. So yeah, essentially my job is to create as much pipeline for the team so that we can hit our revenue targets quarterly and annually. And yeah, it's a target-based role. So you have a kind of number of meetings that you're responsible for a month. And then once you're an account executive, you have revenue targets that you need to close.
So coming on to the final question, which we love asking our guests, if you could go back to a time, maybe the time when you're in university considering law, maybe if you're in recruiting, what is one thing you do the same? What is one thing you do differently? And what is one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
What I would do the same, two things. I would explore like I did, and be really open-minded to different career paths, even if it was slightly different to what I always thought I would do or what everyone else was doing around me. Was just be really open and non-judgmental and just go for it and explore different things. What I would also do the same is use university resources at the start of my career journey, because through mentorship program at university, essentially was partnered with my first ever mentor, John Keeley, who is still one of my mentors to this day. And I think one thing I want to leave people with is that the power of mentorship is huge. To be able to have somebody senior in their career who has gone through the weeds and they know what you're going through and they understand the uncertainty of being young and trying to figure out what you want to do is huge. So you can get that through, official mentorship programs in education. There are ones online you can apply to. You can just network through LinkedIn and sell yourself and reach out to people. But that's the thing I would do the same at the start of my career, is to explore and to definitely find a mentor, because it supported me so much. And it's been 2 or 3 years since I graduated. But even when I quit my job in February, I asked John to meet for breakfast and I wanted to have his opinion on what I should do. So they stay with you and they're really, really important relationships. The thing that I would do differently, I always hate to say that I would do things differently, but I think I wish I really dug into what a startup is at that age. Even though I was like 19, 20, 21, I didn't really know what it means to work at a startup. And so when people would say, oh, I'm interning at a startup or I'm working at a startup, I always used to think, oh, that's so cool, but I don't really know what you do. And I wish that I had a little bit more curiosity, because I think I explored a lot when it came to corporate industries and different corporate environments, but I didn't explore as much where tech and startups were concerned. And if I'd have done that, I don't think I would have applied to law school. I think I would have gone straight into a tech role, maybe sales, maybe not sales, but I would have probably gone into a role where I'm working at an earlier stage company. So I wish I was a little bit more curious when people would tell me what it is that they do, and go out and research it a little bit more, and ask questions and ask to be connected with people. The thing I would say to myself is stop worrying. Stop staying up at night wondering what it is that you're going to do. Stop comparing yourself to people around you. Stop feeling the pressure of having to have something immediately. Stop feeling loyal to the first job and to the first company, because that's going to hold you back. And just relax a little bit, because life gets you where you need to be. Not always where you want to be, but definitely where you need to be. You for sure will end up there. That's what I'd say.
Love that. No, such a brilliant final question answer, and just want to thank you for the whole way through. To be honest, the honesty that you've spoken to us with has been brilliant. Like, some of the answers you've given us took a lot, I guess, to share that personal experience with us, and I'm sure that anyone listening will find it very, very useful to actually hear that insight, and that this is actually how people think about it, particularly someone in your position now, where you've gone through that journey and you've ended up in a place that you're clearly really enjoying, thanks to Jumpstart along the way. And hopefully for them listening to this, they'll be able to hopefully replicate the same kind of messages, right? So thank you so much, Fatima. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and thanks again for coming on.
For sure. Thank you for having me on, guys.
Okay, absolutely love that episode. It was so good and so many takeaways. As always, Jumpstart being promoted, and as we said, we're not just saying this, it is genuinely a very, very unbelievable value prop for grads. So happy we can shed some more light on it. But if you don't mind, Jamie, I'll crack on with the first takeaway. And I think it's how we started the podcast, with asking her about money. But I think it's so interesting, and it's a massive frustration of both of ours, that people don't speak more about money and accept that people sometimes are money motivated. And I think it's completely okay to have that, especially when you have a background like Fatima did. I think accepting that money is a cool thing to have and opens so many more doors is amazing. And I would love people to take away from this episode that perhaps in the UK we should be a bit more money motivated and accept that money is a thing that plays a part in everyone's lives.
Yeah, most definitely. And if you want to look at it like she does, like the coin operated terminology, if that makes you feel better about it, then definitely it's a good way to think about it. But there's no doubt in anyone's mind that money is important to everyone. So feel free to be motivated by it, because there's nothing shameful about that. So I think it's a very important takeaway, and glad she was honest enough to share that with us. Another thing that she shared, which I think was a really good way of looking at things, was she talked about it in the context of looking back to your inner niggling child and doing a introspection of if you can relate back to what you were like back then. And it was what her therapist encouraged her to think about, is what does she actually really enjoy doing? And that kind of translates now into what was making her tick, and with the curiosity that she's approached it with. If you can figure out what it is that makes you tick, then maybe that can help you in finding the right kind of career for you. And I thought that was brilliant in how that's clearly something that's developed right in her childhood, but it's something she's still thinking about and applying when she's doing her work and her career today.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think to add to that, it's basically almost the whole point of this podcast is that people just need to think, ourselves included, really think about a career, because a career, you can change careers, of course, but you do want a trajectory, and that trajectory is going to be with you for 50 years. So it's really important to think about what you do, and it's cool to try out different things. But, spending a bit more time thinking, I think, is something that I definitely should have done, and I think a lot of other people can take that away. So yeah, love that. And then just to finish as the last roundup, I absolutely loved what she said right at the end. Massively guilty of this. And it's this thing that is stop worrying. Although we love to promote people thinking about their careers and people taking their careers seriously, it does actually work itself out at the end. And there's worrying, A, doesn't really gain much, but B, is also just unneeded stress, and kind of putting action plans into place and doing things is a lot better than sitting about worrying. Things will work out, and Fatima is a testament to that. So I definitely took that part away.
Okay, yeah, brilliantly summed up. Can't add anything to that. So to summarise those three, the first one is be open to thinking about money and be open to talk about it. And the second one is relate to your inner child and work out what makes you tick. And the third one is just stop worrying.
Lovely. Very well summed up. And as always, great guest, really inspirational career, and looking forward to seeing what she does the next few years. But shout out to Jumpstart again for putting us in touch with Fatima. You can check them out all in the description of this episode, and check out the video podcast on YouTube or get your podcast audio wherever you get your podcasts. Great episode, Jamie. I'm looking forward to the next Jumpstart one.